Today we're going to talk about the issue of DPS and crime. We're going to outline a number of initiatives that we're going to be looking at as we go into the new year. But before we do that, we want to talk a little bit about the issue of deaths in custody in our prisons. This has been an issue that has come up recently, and this is something that we're working on and looking into. And so we've had approximately 15 individuals that have died in custody since the beginning of the calendar year. So that's 15 individuals that have died in custody since the beginning of the calendar year. What we do know at this point is the investigation into the deaths indicate that none of the inmates at this time have died as a result of others. In other words, murders or otherwise inappropriate dealings with the individuals in prison. And so there are certain things we can and cannot talk about, obviously, because of HIPAA, and our Deputy Attorney General can talk about the HIPAA issues when it comes to disclosing information to the public as opposed to families. And we also have Jen Winkleman online. So just real quick, we'll have John Skidmore talk about what prohibits us from just disclosing personal information to the world through the press or other means. And we'll have Jen briefly talk about trend lines and number of deaths. And then we can open it up for questions at that point regarding the corrections, the number of deaths in the corrections system. So, John, if you just take a minute here and just talk about the prohibitions on what we can and cannot disclose.
Good afternoon, John Skidmore, the Deputy Attorney General for the Alaska Department of Law and the Criminal Division. What I can tell you is that under federal law, HIPAA prohibits any provider of medical services, which includes the Department of Corrections, from disclosing information about people's health records. And so we're not allowed to go into the details of what sort of ailment or illness someone may have had. What we can tell you is that every death that occurs in Alaska's correctional facilities are investigated in the same way that every officer-involved shooting is investigated. The Alaska State Troopers investigate every death that occurs for someone that is in custody, and all of those investigations then are referred over to the Office of Special Prosecutions when there's ever any concern that it may rise to the level of any sort of criminal conduct. And what I can tell you is that today we do not have any cases at this time that have presented themselves as rising to the level of criminal conduct. All of the deaths are investigated, but again, federal law prohibits us from giving the details of precisely why the person died, because that gets into their personal medical histories.
Thanks, John. So again, we're prohibited until next of kin is notified after the investigation has been completed. Jen Winkleman, the Acting Commissioner of Corrections, is online. And Jen, if you could just take a minute and just talk about numbers over the past several years to just give a perspective for the people of Alaska. And before Jen does that, I want to emphasize this is taken very seriously by this administration, by the individuals that work for this administration. All of these investigations will be thorough. And again, we will follow all applicable law, and we will make sure that we don't violate anyone's privacy rights. But nonetheless, any death in our custody, in our care, is viewed very seriously. We'll continue to investigate as we do all deaths, and make sure that once those investigations are completed, next of kin is notified. So Jen, do you want to just talk about trend lines for a minute?
Yeah, thank you, Governor. Good afternoon, Acting Commissioner Jen Winkleman with the Department of Corrections. And just want to reiterate what the Governor mentioned with regard to there is no reason to believe that any of the deaths as of today have died as a result of others. It is absolutely tragic when someone dies. We realize these are someone's friends, our prisoners are someone's family, they are somebody's friends, and we never forget that. While it's unfortunate to have any death, it is not unusual, and it is not a reflection on our staff's ability to care. We have over 30,000 people that enter and leave our facilities every year, and it's often a very sick population. 80% have not had medical care within the prior year. The average number of deaths over the last 10 years is nearly 12 deaths per year. As Mr. Skidmore mentioned, reviews are done after every death, and only limited information can be shared. The correction staff is dedicated to protecting the lives of those in their care every day, and they do. And we are not, we are proud 1,900 Alaskans working for the Department of Corrections, working hard to care for our inmate population.
So thanks, Jen. So are there any questions at this point on this part of the press conference related to corrections that we can answer? If not, we'll move on. But also, questions could be sent to Jeff, and we'll answer them over time as well. Yes.
I think we have a question from James Brooks of the Alaska Beacon. James, do you have a question on inmate deaths? James, are you there? Okay. Let's go to Margie Bauman with the Cordova Times. Margie?
Hello?
Go ahead, Margie.
Yeah, I can barely hear you. I do have a question for the governor, and that is when a person is admitted, sentenced in the prison system, what, if any, kind of physical exam is given to that individual? Particularly since you've noted that a lot of these people have not had any medical care for some time before they entered into the prison system. And there is a decidedly limited amount of care available. There are shortages all over the medical field. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Margie. Jen, do you want to talk about the admitting procedures and anything related to health checkups?
Absolutely, Governor, thank you. Every single inmate that is remanded into a facility, it goes through a medical exam and through a mental health exam, or a checklist, essentially. Unfortunately, everybody gets screened at remanded, and if any issues come up, then they are referred for more thorough assessment. But unfortunately, we rely on the communication often of the inmate. We do our best to contact their providers out in the community, but sometimes you have folks that aren't going to be honest about their alcohol or drug use because they may be afraid that they're going to be charged with another crime. So our care is as good as the information that we are receiving.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Jeff? Okay. Thank you, everybody. And so we're going to move into the issue on crimes and how we're going to address crime going forward. So obviously, public safety has been and will continue to be the number one priority of this administration. We've made a lot of progress. The crime rates are at a 41-year low. I repeat, it's a 41-year low. Every category but arson is down in 2021. That includes sexual assault. We'll talk about that here in a moment. So every category but arson is down in 2021. The issue of arson, to a great extent, can be attributed to one individual in the interior past year that there was a series of arsons committed by this individual. Violent crime is down almost 10% in 2021. This is all bucking the trend that you see in the lower 48. Property crime is the lowest since 1974. Motor vehicle theft down more than half since 2018. So there's a lot of work to do still, and we're going to continue to do that. And you'll see that also reflected in the budget that we put forward that is due no later than December 15th. So sexual assault remains high. It's unacceptably high. And we will continue to focus and target this particular issue in all of our efforts, as well as our budgeting efforts. Also dealing with Alaskans being poisoned, and it is, being poisoned by a plague of fentanyl coming from China and entering this country, in most cases, through our southern border in the southern United States. So we've updated our consent laws this year, and we'll continue pursuing our People's First initiatives. We've also cleared the backlog of unprocessed sexual assault kits. This is important. We had a backlog when we came into office. We began the process of working on that, and we've cleared that backlog up. We're also collecting ODNA once you're admitted into the correction system to make sure that that DNA is cataloged to ensure that we can protect the public going forward. Just recently, a second suspect was indicted based upon evidence from a processed sexual assault kit. So it is important. And modern technology, as the technology progresses, we'll incorporate that into our investigations, as well as court proceedings to make sure that justice is served. So we're not going to rest in our pursuit of justice and protecting every Alaskan, no matter where they are, who they are, where they live. And as part of that effort today, we're announcing additional measures to address the issue of illicit fentanyl. Obviously, we have no control over the border as a state, and we'll continue discussions with our federal partners to do whatever we can to make sure that the flow of fentanyl coming across the border is mitigated to the greatest extent possible. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we're going to introduce legislation to increase the penalty for a dealer. This is a dealer, not an addict, but a dealer, when someone dies as a result of taking an illicit drug. So if you're a dealer, you want to pay attention to what we're about to just tell you here. Currently, it's a manslaughter or a Class A felony if an individual dies as a result of your dealing in drugs. We're going to increase this offense to second-degree murder. This carries a sentence of up to 99 years in prison. Dealers who traffic in fentanyl or fentanyl-laced drugs will be on notice that they'll face severe consequences. We're also going to change parole. There's going to be no good time parole for drug dealers. So current law requires mandatory parole for, quote, good time. This is limited in cases of murder and sexual assault by nature of the seriousness of the crimes. And we're going to add drug dealing to this category. Vehicular homicide, we're also updating the statute. Prosecutors don't have clear guidance currently on what charges to file. This will create 3 classes of vehicular homicides depending upon the circumstances. All these actions will keep up our efforts to protect public safety, punish offenders, and deter those who would do harm to others. I do also want to say that we will be in our budget putting forth initiatives that will help on the substance addiction side of things. Those individuals that are addicted to substances, that are looking for help, that want to get out of that terrible situation. As we put our budget together this year, we will be addressing that issue and how we can help those individuals that want to turn their life around. So one side, you got the criminal approach, obviously, and the other side, we're going to have the addiction approach and helping fellow Alaskans who want to get out of this awful situation. Before I turn this over to Commissioner Cockrell, I want to congratulate him for the work of all the agencies involved in this year's targeted effort against illicit drugs. Through their hard work, they've seized more than 2.45, I repeat, 2.45 million doses of illicit fentanyl, and an initiative that undoubtedly saved countless lives by getting this poison off the streets. And again, we're not going to relent in these efforts, and the legislation we propose today is a key piece of our initiatives to protect the public. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Commissioner Cockrell, and we'll be taking some questions shortly thereafter. Commissioner?
Thank you, Governor. I'm James Cockrell, the Commissioner of Alaska Department of Public Safety. Thank you for being here. First of all, I want to address an ongoing situation that started occurring yesterday in Soldotna with a individual that's extremely armed, shot at a residence in Soldotna, caught the residence on fire, potentially could have killed 2 people. The Alaska State Troopers, your Alaska State Troopers, spent about 14, 15 hours yesterday and last night trying to capture him. He has evaded our capture. We believe that he stole the vehicle, a red SUV Ford Expedition. We believe he's heavily armed and will not hesitate to take a life of another person, including a law enforcement officer. We have photographs distributed around the state, around local media outlets, and our webpage. If you happen to see Mr. Dean Byring, he's 62 years old, he's a white male, about 5'9", 160 pounds. Please alert your local law enforcement or the Alaska State Troopers. He needs to be caught immediately. He's a danger to the public. With that said, about 2 weeks ago, we were standing here at the crime lab talking about illicit drugs and our interceptions of illicit drugs around the state, and specifically fentanyl. And that was October 4th. Since October 4th, your Alaska State Troopers and task force officers have seized an additional 18,500 counterfeit fentanyl pills and over 5 pounds of fentanyl in the powder form. To take that in perspective, if that dosage was given out, it would kill every Alaskan in this state plus a lot more. And that's just in 2 weeks. That just shows you the volume of fentanyl and drugs that are coming into our state. We've got a river of drugs coming into our state that are affecting our young adults' lives. These drugs destroy people's lives, our communities, and our culture. Drug dealers are playing Russian roulette with our people. We need to stop this. Legislation aimed today that the governor's presenting will at least hold these drug dealers that are dealing illicit fentanyl and heroin, hold them accountable for their heinous actions that they're doing. They're literally killing our young people. We need this to stop. And one way to stop is put these drug dealers in for life instead of just letting them get out after a few years. The public can help by submitting tips to your local law enforcement, to the Alaska State Troopers. We have a tip line, an app, that Alaska Tips, that you can submit tips to your law enforcement agencies or to our Alaska State Troopers, because it's not only us or law enforcement has to tackle this. This has to be a community, I guess, war on drugs. We have to step forward. You have to step forward. You have to keep an eye on your kids, and you have to report people that are selling drugs to your kids. That's the only way we're going to stop this. Again, I thank you for being here. This is very important to get out to the public, and I want to turn it over to Assistant Attorney General John Skidmore. Thank you.
So the piece of legislation that the governor's talking about is going to be introduced in the next legislative session, and it's really going to be targeted on doing three things. The first thing that it's going to look at is what you've heard both Commissioner Cockrell and the governor discuss, which is increase the classification for the crime for those individuals who distribute illegal narcotics to someone else, and that individual dies as a direct result of having ingested, having taken, putting that substance into their body. Why is this significant? Well, you heard the governor hold a press conference back in July of this year in which it was announced in 2021 there was a 74% increase in overdose deaths in Alaska between 2020 and 2021. Alaska leads the nation in the greatest increase in overdose deaths, and that's something that needs to be addressed. One of the steps that's being proposed is to increase this classification from manslaughter to murder in the second degree. To put that into perspective, manslaughter is a Class A felony, and a first-time sentence is 4 to 7 years with a maximum of 20. But murder in the second degree is a minimum of 15 and a maximum of 99. This is not going after individuals that are addicted. This is not going after the people that have that substance abuse problem. It is going after the individuals that are peddling that poison to our citizens. And that's significant for the entire state, but it's especially significant for Alaska Natives because they are disproportionately the individuals that die from overdose deaths in our state. So that's the first thing this piece of legislation does. The second, it's also going to restrict eligibility for what's called good time or mandatory parole for those individuals that are distributing drugs. Again, fentanyl is perhaps the most deadly substance in the drugs that are out there, but that particular substance, fentanyl, is finding its way in to all of the other drugs. Heroin, cocaine, marijuana, methamphetamine. Fentanyl finds its way into all of these other drugs, and so the distribution of any illegal drugs in the state is what creates that risk and that problem. And one of the other ways that we'll address this, in addition to addressing those individuals that are killed from overdose, it will also address those individuals convicted for distributing and restrict their eligibility for good time or mandatory parole. And the third piece of the legislation deals with what we refer to as vehicular homicide. Vehicular homicide is where another citizen is killed by someone driving a motor vehicle. And you think, what in the world does that have to do with drugs? Well, simply put, the vast majority of vehicular homicides that occur in our state are committed by individuals under the influence of controlled substances. We're not changing the law on vehicular homicides. Let me be very clear about that. We are not changing the law. What we are doing is codifying current case law. The Alaska Supreme Court, in just this year, in a case called State v. Graham, reaffirmed precisely what we're going to be placing into law, which is that there are 3 levels of vehicular homicide. First is aggravated vehicular homicide. That's at the level of a murder 2 or of an unclassified felony. A typical vehicular homicide is at the level of manslaughter or a Class A felony. And the third is criminally negligent homicide or negligent vehicular homicide will be the new statute that is introduced. It's at that same level. It's a Class B felony. And in each of those instances, we do this to help provide guidance to the public and to the courts. After all, I just mentioned the Alaska Supreme Court handed down a case just this year. Why? Because the Alaska Court of Appeals got it wrong. They tried to overturn a sentence that was imposed by a trial court for a murder in the second degree because they themselves got confused about the status of the law in the state. And so by us introducing this in legislation, by codifying it, it will help provide clarity for all of the practitioners, for all of the citizens, and for the courts as well. That's the sum and substance of what the legislation will be doing. Governor?
Thanks, John. So Jeff, let's open up for questions.
Okay, Governor, we'll start here in the room. The question from Trill Gates with your Alaska link.
Thank you, Governor. I just wanted to go back to when you were talking about, well, one of you was talking about this community war on drugs. And I want to talk a little bit about the education piece for, I think about our young Alaskans and how important to get, I guess, what types of, promotion or education to even get to a point where we prevent these young kids making these choices and going into like being a drug dealer in the future, or just the education piece on what we can do to reach younger Alaskans to prevent this altogether. I know it's probably just wishful thinking, but I mean, it seems like it has to start somewhere.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, obviously we'll be having conversations with our Department of Education as well on this topic. This will be an all hands on deck approach. But, as you mentioned, this has been around for a long time, meaning the issue of substance abuse. It's been around for a while. The issue of fentanyl, though, because of fentanyl, this rises to a whole different level. It's a whole different drug than marijuana. It's a whole different drug than many of the other classes of drugs that we have, because the evidence is pretty clear that it's pretty potent and it can kill you pretty quick. The evidence is also pretty clear that the shape, size, and color of fentanyl is also evolving. I mean, there's been some fentanyl that's been intercepted in pill form that almost looks like candy. It's a very dangerous drug. It has its medical uses, strictly controlled, but again, this is something that is flooding into this country. As a result, you've got to take some very tough measures. And anyone that doesn't care about the life of another, anyone that whether an individual dies or not is not their problem, is not going to become their problem. So the idea is that once they decide to go down the road of being a drug dealer, they really have to face the possibility that when they're caught, and they will be caught, they'll be looking out at the world through bars for a very long time because of their total disregard for human life. So absolutely, we need to continue with the education process, but we also have to make it clear that if you're dealing in fentanyl, you're really dealing in your own life in terms of taking your own freedom being taken away from you because of your actions.
Okay, Governor, we have one more question in the room before going to the teleconference line. Let's go to Luke with Alaska's News Source.
Awesome. Thank you. So you've introduced numerous initiatives combating crime and have made public safety one of your priorities as governor. Why enact this measure now, and is there a reason you did not support this or were unable to support this earlier in your term?
No, it's you continually address issues as they arise. And there's always a ton of issues confronting any state in this country. Any country is always dealing with issues. We've dealt with a lot of issues. We made sure that public safety was number one before we got into office. We talked about repealing SB 91 because, SB 91 because we felt that it contributed to an approach to crime in a manner that ended up being conducive to committing more crime. So no, we've been working on crime before I got into office. Now that we're in office, we're going to continue to work on crime. And I think the statistics are very important. We're not just talking about dealing with crime. We're actually looking at our efforts resulting in outcomes that we all want. So as I mentioned earlier, from 2015 to 2018, before we got in, crime increased 54% from 2014. From 2019 to 2021, after this administration's been in office, the rates have decreased 6%. We're going to continue to address crime. We're going to continue to address domestic assault, sexual violence, thefts, murders, drug dealing, because those are issues that anyone and everyone should be confronting and dealing with.
Okay, now let's go to James Brooks with the Alaska Beacon. James, your question?
Hi there. Question is regarding other or a different branch. I know with higher penalties for drug dealers, we've seen before drug dealers get arrested, put in jail, but others arise to take their place. Is there something that's intended to address the supply side of this problem, the demand for this?
So the supply side, we believe we can address to some degree by the bills we're going to introduce to make it very painful for a drug dealer to deal in drugs that result in the death of an individual. We will continue to work with our federal partners to tighten up the borders, because of the whole idea of an open, porous border, you got the drugs coming in from a country on the southern border. And then the demand side is another issue. We have to work with those that are already addicted. We have to educate those that are young enough that we can make an impression upon them that this is not the life to lead. It's a dead end. So it's a multi-pronged approach. There's no doubt about it. So supply will be addressed. Demand will be addressed. Substance abuse and addiction will be addressed. You're not going to win this war, or at the very least, get on top of it or get in front of it without doing all three.
Okay, and our next question is from Margie Bauman at the Cordova Times. Margie?
Yeah, thank you very much. I have 4 quick questions for the governor. Where do you think most of these drugs are coming in? Are they coming in over the road system, by airplane, or over the water? Second question, what's the average age of those overdosing? Third question, you said this is a major issue with Alaskan Natives. Are we talking more rural or urban? And the fourth question, does your department plan to work on this issue with parent-teacher associations? Thank you.
So Margie, I think you've started a new trend by turning one question into 4. I have a feeling now that everyone will convert their questions into a multi-pronged approach. Good questions. So on the Alaska Native issue, if I get one of the guys behind me to want to address that, we'll deal with it. We will be working with educational office, including, as you mentioned, parent-teacher approaches. We're going to start with our own Department of Education to talk with some of those individuals, and HES, and our health department as well, and our social services department to have that discussion as well. I don't know what the average age is. I think it varies in terms of addiction. And does anyone remember the third or the fourth?
I have the third.
Okay, come on up.
Yeah, I wanted to know where you think most of these drugs are coming in
Southern border.
from.
Southern border, Margie, that's where we think. And if you're asking the method, is it coming in by plane mostly? Is it coming in by boat mostly? Is it coming overland? Does anyone, do we have an idea? Or is it all 3?
It's essentially all 3.
It's all 3, Margie.
Thank you.
And Margie, this is John Skidmore from the Department of Law. The answer to your questions are actually found in a document that was presented by the Alaska Department of Health, the Division of Public Health. It's called Alaska Facts and Figures 2021 Drug Overdose Mortality Update that was published on July 25th of 2022. If you look on the third page of that, it actually sets out that the largest number of individuals that are passing away from drugs are 25 to 34, followed up by those that are 35 to 44. And when you ask about the region in which individuals are dying most frequently, the way they have that set out is that Anchorage has the largest number of individuals that are having the drug overdoses at 142. That's followed by the Gulf Coast and then by the Mat-Su.
Thank you very much.
Okay, no more questions, Governor.
So again, we'll continue to work this issue as we will all the issues confronting Alaska. Public safety is our number one priority and should be for any state, to be perfectly honest with you. We've made some huge inroads over the past 4 years on crime. Again, our violent crime rates from 2019 to 2021 are down 14%. This is a 6-year low compared to 2018. The approach is never done, though. You can't rest on your laurels. I mean, there are, we certainly have some issues. We've made some incredible progress. We believe through these initiatives we've outlined today, we'll make even more progress. And I don't think anyone can rest until Alaska is considered to be one of the safest states in the country. We're heading in that direction. We're moving in the right direction. And we'll continue to work with any and all stakeholders, including the legislature, nonprofits, other law enforcement agencies, both federal, state, and local. And I think if we bird dog this, which we have, we'll continue to see the rates go down. We'll continue to make Alaska safer. And we'll continue to make this a place that our kids and grandkids can call home and feel good about being a resident of the great state of Alaska. So with that, I want to thank you. And I'm sure we'll be talking again on some other issues as well. So have a great day.